My name is Blair Williams. I am at the Cumberland County Historical Society in Carlisle, PA, and I'm interviewing Wilson O'Donnell. And I don't know where you are, Wilson. So
I'm in Seattle.
all right. I knew you had moved to Washington, but I thought you had moved to Washington, but I wasn't sure where exactly you were located right now. So
yeah, I live in Pioneer Square, which is the oldest part of the city of Seattle, and I live in a converted Burlington Northern Railway warehouse. So it's a kind of a cool space, and
where did you get your start in life?
Born in Western PA, Sharpsville, and sort of a little bit north of Pittsburgh, and a little bit south of Erie. So it's close to the PA-Ohio border. A steel working area. My dad worked for a steel mill for his entire life. I went to Penn State as an undergraduate, and later went to the Cooperstown graduate program in up in New York, where I sort of got my specific museum training and degree. Just prior to my going to grad school, I had worked for 4 years at a small county historical society in central Pennsylvania.
Well, so I know I was told that you got your start here at CCHS because of, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act for the U.S. Civilian Employment and Training. Was that how soon after that, or after graduating from Penn State, did you come to CCHS?
Yeah, good question. So I graduated from Penn State in spring of 1974, which I'm sure sounds like ancient history to you. I was a little bit lost as to what to do. I had a degree in anthropology, which you can't do a whole lot with, as it turned out. And I was living and working in Harrisburg after graduating, and with a horrible job with the state registering snowmobiles. And I spent a lot of time walking over to what was then the William Penn Memorial Museum, now the State Museum, I think. And I happened to sort of go through one time, they had an exhibit around the Pennsylvania Germans of Pennsylvania. And it was, I knew nothing about that group of folks and what they did. And I sort of was just hugely impressed with the material culture that they had produced. So at that point, I called up the director of the museum to ask him and to tell him that I would like to work for him. I think he was very amused by that. His name was J. Duncan Campbell, but he did allow me to come in and talk with him, which I did, and it led to, I started to do a internship in the collections of the museum. And later that year, so that would have been probably sometime in early 1970 or mid 1975, something like that. And I also did a same type of internship, both of which were unpaid, by the way, at the York Historical Society, a little south of Harrisburg. And as I was working at both of those, I really became interested. And Harry Rinker, the director at the York County Historical Society, actually was hired to install the first permanent exhibits at the Cumberland County Historical Society. And it was through him that I learned that the Cumberland County Historical Society had a position open as curator, and he recommended that I go and interview with them, and he set it up, etc. And I was happy to do so, and that's how I came to Cumberland County Historical Society. I went for an interview with Roger Steck, and I later had an interview with Milton Flower, who was chair of the museum committee at that time. I actually had a very nice recommendation from J. Duncan Campbell, who became a friend, and who also knew Milton, and they hired me.
Well, I mean, you're mentioning a lot of names that, of people I never knew, but that, constantly come up just being here at Cumberland County. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the people like Roger, like Milton.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jonas Worrell and other sort of people that, you walk by and you just see their names on the walls, and, we have a portrait of Milton in the other room here. I'm constantly pulling up Lenore Flower, Milton's mother, her genealogy work. So if you could speak a little bit about some of these individuals.
Yeah, and I saw the list that you had on your questionnaire. So Roger Steck actually was sort of a very interesting guy. He considered himself a newspaper man, and he was retired, and he worked part-time as the director of the society. He was, and I think he took on that position because his sister was married to P.K. Miller, who was a wealthy commercial real estate guy. And I think in that connection, I think PK was really interested in the organization because he was a big antiques collector, and I think he liked sort of having some influence over the building of collections at the organization. Roger was sort of a interesting guy. We got along really well. The best thing was he never interfered with any of my responsibilities while I worked there. Wow. He would readily admit that he had really knew nothing about museums and what they did and collections, etc., except that I think he really enjoyed running publicity for the organization, talking, to newspapers and about the place. He handled the finances, etc. So we get along very well. and I think we respected each other. Um, um, but because he was so tied to Mr. Miller, it was sort of when Roger asked me to do something, or we wanted to do something, it was really, I think, coming from PK. So it was sort of an interesting, I think, time to be in an organization that was just beginning to sort of move towards professionalization. And so there was this kind of interesting relationship and tension between those of us who worked and those who sat on the board. So Roger Steck was key for me when I was there, and he was a great supporter. I greatly appreciated him. Jonas Worrell, I don't know that I ever really knew him. Name sounded very familiar when you had it down, but I really had very little to do with him. Same was true of Bob Christ. I knew him, but we really didn't have much contact. I'm sure he was on the board. I'm assuming Jonas Worrell was probably on the board at some point when I was there. The other person who I did spend a whole lot more time with, who I don't know whether he was on the board when I was there, but probably was at some point, Roger Todd, who was super generous. He was what I would consider to be a real gentleman. He loved the society. The only thing I think he loved more than his family and the society was his church. But he was always working in the photo collection, and I'm pretty sure that he did a sort of a photo booklet. He was always very proud of one of the photographs of a toll booth on one of the roads around Carlisle that had a female toll taker, which
was that Minerva something?
It could be,
Yeah.
but he called it the Toll House Cookie, and because he had a really great sense of humor, and that was risque, I think, for him. But he was great. I really enjoyed him and his wife. His wife was very nice as well. But I saw him around. He was around the organization quite a bit. Somebody I spent a little more time with was Warren Gates, who was a professor of history at Dickinson College, and he was on the board. I think he was actually a president of the board for a year or so while I was there. Great guy. He and I would have a lot of conversations about what history meant and what it might look like in a small historical organization like ours. He didn't know, and he didn't incorporate in his thinking very well, from my perspective now, how collections would fit into the telling of really great history stories. He was far more interested in the archives and in photography to a certain degree. But that's to be expected. He seemed to me to be a pretty traditional, in retrospect, pretty traditional type of historian. And I thought did a really good job promoting the society when I was there. Mary Lou Shawman, who I think is a current board member.
Yeah, she just rejoined.
She did. Well, please tell her I said hello. I think very fondly of her. And she was just a volunteer when I was there, and obviously young, since I remember her well.
Yeah.
But I think she loved genealogy,
Yes.
and
Yep.
probably still does. And she was a huge Anglophile when I knew her. And so I know that she liked to collect porcelains and all that kind of stuff from England, and always interested in the royal family and what they were doing, etc. But she was really fun. Had a lot of laughs. She had a great sense of humor. I'm saying she has, I'm sure,
Yeah. Definitely.
since she's still on the board. And I love that she's still involved. I think that's wonderful. Let's see who else. I knew Mrs. King,
Okay.
who donated the 2 Mile House, I believe.
Yep.
I don't know whether she was she might have been on the board when I was there. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, but she was very gracious. She had me out to her house a couple of times for brunch, and she would show me around the house, and those are the kinds of things that I truly loved about an organization like CCHS, because you could really get to know the people who you were preserving their history for. So that was great.
To clarify, you were at CCHS from 1977 to 81, or am I getting those dates wrong?
76 to 80.
76 to 80. Okay, it was a year off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember when Mrs. King became the first female board member of the society and what the years were, but I think it would have been around that time. It might have been a little bit before.
Wow, I didn't know that she was the first. That's news to me. I didn't know that. I knew there were certain members, and I'll get to the ones who really I interacted with most. But of course, during that time, how do I want to say this? The board wasn't very diverse.
Yeah.
And was primarily men. I didn't realize that Mrs. King was the first. And I don't know what her when she started and how long she stayed on the board, etc. What I do know was that the only 2 women who I think I knew who were on the board were her and Anne Kramer Hoffer.
Yeah.
Hoffer, yes, thank you.
And Anne is also still heavily involved with the organization. So
that's not surprising to me. And she was, I really liked her. I liked almost everybody. I'm trying to think if there's somebody I didn't like. I can't think of them. They're usually like one, you know.
Sure.
I've worked for a number of organizations. There's always sort of one, but I can't think of anybody. But and Anne was really bright, really energetic. I thought she had a huge amount of energy, and was much more progressive thinking than typical board member.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, and I think she got onto the board probably right at the end of my time at Monmouth County, or at Cumberland County. So,
yeah, I think it would have been around 80 or 81 that she first joined.
Yeah. Well, if I were still there, it must have been probably maybe at the end of the 80s, something like that. So let's see. I really spent the trustees I was most involved with were Colonel Edgar Cottle,
Okay.
who was retired military, who was a great friend and supporter, and he helped me build most of the exhibits that we installed when I was there. I already mentioned Pearson Miller. He was a guy who got basically what he wanted, and he had certain there were certain tensions between him and Milton Flower, who was really my mentor. And Pearson was I think he was a discerning collector, but he sometimes used his wealth and position as a tool for promoting himself and his status, etc., which perfectly fine, because he and I got along well, and he was a great supporter. So, but Milton was really the person who I spent most of my time with. We became good friends. As he liked to say it, he was my Dutch uncle. So we worked closely together. When I was there, he was the real heart of the organization, and I spent a lot of time over at 166 Pomfret, which is where he lived.
Yeah.
And he had some fabulous stuff. I don't know whether or not any of it was left to the museum with you, but just I would go over and he would quiz me on what he had. He would, I think one of the first times I went and he invited me over for lunch, and having lunch with Milton was like having lunch with a duke, right?
Yeah.
He was ramrod straight, tall, very elegant man, very smart. He was a professor of political science at Dickinson, but he really wanted to be me in my job. That's what he really would have wanted to do. And so I think he sort of adopted me as a mentee, which I greatly appreciated. And our friendship lasted far after I was gone from Carlisle, and right up into his death. So Milton was he was sort of just a piece of work. But he and I worked on exhibits together, and we worked to build the collection. Pardon me. I can't say it. I mean, Milton was one of those people in your life who, if it weren't for the relationship you built during that kind of mentee-mentor, I would never have liked him. He was an elitist. Sure. And his mother was even more so, although I never met her. She had a profound influence on him. And he also, I think he had two aunts by the name of Penrose, the Misses Penrose. And they were very early dealers in antiques in Carlisle. Someone might want to take a look at that someday, because they were well known.
I think,
and I think he inherited their home and collection, etc., as well when they passed away, which was before I got to Cumberland County. But Milton had a very specific way of wanting to do things, and we worked out a great relationship. And as I say, his house was fabulous. So
I live on I live on that block, and
oh, I'm Pomfret.
yeah. So, and I always I like to jog, and so I always go by, and I always look and see 166, and I always think of Lenore and Milton. Although I never met them, but
Yeah.
they were. I started a little long after they were gone, but no. When you said Penrose, Mary Lou Shaman wrote an article for the Gardner Library about the Penrose Sisters, and I guess they were leading anti-suffragists, suffragists.
Yeah.
And the names are Virginia, Ellen, Valeria, and Sarah. So I don't know if those are the same Penrose sisters, or
I
maybe
can't
a different
imagine that
Penrose
there would
family.
be. Yeah, there can't be too many of them, right? It's a small town. Suffragettes.
Yeah, they were.
That would sound. That
I
would.
think two of them were anti, and one was in favor of it. So it kind of caused family discord.
Okay, that's good to know. Fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think if there was anyone else who. I think those were the major players who interacted with within the organization when I was there.
Well, you mentioned the first gentleman you mentioned, the retired colonel, and Milton, and some of the other helped you build or put on the exhibits. What was that process like?
Well, as I mentioned before, the folks down at York County had installed the permanent exhibit, which was the first addition to the Hamilton Library, and on the second floor.
Yeah, because I think right now I'm in the what is the traditional building, and then so I think what used to be is sort of the library was on the first floor. Is that right?
Library was on the first floor. There was an auditorium to the, I'm guessing, the north of the library room, and then the archives and the photograph collection were behind behind the Hamilton Library reading room. Okay. And then you and the entrance to the organization was then sort of in between the old Hamilton Library and the new auditorium. And on the second floor there was sort of a, I don't know what to call it, sort of a sitting room above the Hamilton Library. And then there was a hallway that took you to the main exhibition area, which would have been right above the auditorium at that point. And then you went from there behind the mechanical room, which sort of sat in the center. And then there were more exhibits there, and then you exited out into that room above the Hamilton Library. So it was sort of a circular pattern. But the two places, and so those permanent exhibits we tweaked over time and sort of added to, but where we did our biggest work was in the hallway between, on the second floor, between sort of the sitting room and the museum. There was a nice hallway where we could do little quick exhibits, and then we made the decision that if we wanted to do larger exhibits, we'd do do special exhibits in the auditorium.
Okay.
So that's where the major exhibits that we did, that's where the Colonel was very helpful, because we had no exhibit furniture except for what York had built for the exhibits on the second floor. And he had a workshop, and so I'd go out to his place and we'd build whatever we needed and haul them in and, you know, install exhibits. I was pretty much left to myself to design, write all the copy, do the research for the exhibits. Although I have to say, Milton was always helpful when I would have questions about it or needed to find a reference during the research phase. So that's how the process worked. In terms of just Milton would come to me with ideas and I'd go to Milton with ideas. And that's probably as far as it ever went. I don't know, I never went to a collection or museum committee meeting or to a board meeting, etc. It was just pretty much me and Milton. The other person who I knew sat on the museum committee was PK. So PK and Milton and everybody else was secondary. They two pretty much ran the organization when I was there. So we'd make a decision about sort of what would be interesting, like the Carlisle Indian School exhibit that we did was pretty obvious because it was a anniversary of I don't know, of the school of, I know it started in 79.
Yep.
Yeah, so that would have been it. Yeah. So and in between that, I think I did 3 major exhibits for them. One was on Pennsylvania plank bottom chairs. Another was on redware pottery from Cumberland County. And the third was Cumberland County coverlets. So we were able to do 1 big exhibit per year. That was about it. 4 years. Yeah, that was it. So I have to say that the Carlisle Indian School exhibit remains the most, for me, something that I've reflected on most over the years. It had resonance even, long after I left the museum field per se. I was a professor at the University of Washington in their museum studies program for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And it was, and I just retired. So, that issue of social justice and indigenous peoples, et cetera, is and has been for many years here in Seattle. There are reservations all around us. And I had lots of students, graduate students who were Native American. And so dealing with that issue always took me back to the Carlisle Indian School because they all knew it.
Yeah.
And it was a very negative time in their cultural memory. And in Carlisle, it was a great, I don't know, accomplishment. I can remember Roger Steck and PK and Milton and Roger Todd telling me how they used to watch the students be marched through town to church from the Indian school, and they just thought it was the most wonderful thing, and that they were basically Americanized and saved. So out here, and with the change in the museum field, and all of us, from DEAI to the BIPOC population that we have here. You know, I had to reflect back, because I can remember doing the exhibit and being sort of fascinated by it. But there was always something about it that sort of never sat quite right in the back of my mind, because there was no Native American population in and around Carlisle. I suspect there probably still isn't. And I always felt that this was just sort of a you know, the end of a sad chapter, and that these people had basically been imprisoned. And so the story I tried to tell wasn't that this was good or bad, but that this is what went on.
Well, that sort of the article that was describing that exhibit is how I came across your name. And you know, we're you know, that's something that I think the Historical Society of Carlisle, you know, I struggled with over the years, is how to sort of properly recognize that story. And, you know, with the Dickinson College's Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center, which is what I was scanning the article for, you know, I think, you know, just trying to grapple with that story. And I think she would have started after you were here, but Barbara Landis, for a long time, was, you know, always trying to get the names of the students to the nations, and really took on a prominent role both at CCHS and nationally in terms of sort of telling that story. And I think something she always says, or is, you know, there were about 8,000 students who were at Carlisle, and each one of them had their own story. Sometimes that legacy is a very positive one, in terms of, you know, you had families of doctors, and people remember the experience very fondly. And other times it's a very tragic story. So it's just this difficult thing to grapple with. And, you know, it's the spectrum, and it's very complex. And, you know, you kind of got to look at it individually, but at the same time recognize, yeah, I mean, it was cultural genocide. And how do you handle that?
It was that when I was at Carlisle, it was so early in my career. I mean, I hadn't gotten to grad school. I hadn't, you know, I was just some young kid who was lucky enough to get hired on. And the amount of things that I learned in those 4 years was probably, I learned more in those 4 years than I think I did in any other 4-year period, even going to grad school. I mean, it was a truly life-changing opportunity for me. But I'll tell you one quick story, and because I don't know what your time is like.
However much time you want to give me is how much time I have.
Oh, good, because I'm retired. And as a retired person, what I've learned, the one thing that I've learned is that every day is Saturday.
Okay. So
Right?
that's the opposite experience I've learned from being around retirees. Maybe it's the pandemic, but I often, at least the people who volunteer here at the Historical Society, always say they have no idea how they worked because they're so busy in retirement.
Yeah, I'm getting busier, but there's literally no stress at this point. So
That's good.
That's a good thing. Yeah. During the Indian school exhibit, we had a visitor, an older gentleman who was in a wheelchair, and two younger, one female, one male. And I have to say I've forgotten the names, but the fellow in the wheelchair was a Oglala Sioux, and he had been at the school.
Was it James Garvey?
I don't know. He was a musician.
Yeah, I believe it was. I think it's James Garvey. I can't remember if he was Sioux or not, but he lived in Lancaster, I think.
Maybe, because he came to see the exhibit.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at his student file right now. James Garvey was a member of the Sioux Nation, so I bet that's who it was.
Oh yeah, well that's good to know. But and he was pretty elderly when he came, and with him was his grandniece and her boyfriend.
Okay.
And they were part of AIM. So they brought him, and she was openly hostile to me, to the exhibit, etc. And James would turn to her and put his hand on her, because she had her hand on his shoulder. Mm-hmm. She was almost trembling, and he put his hand on her hand, and he would say, just be calm, just be calm. And so the young lady and her boyfriend, I think, began to tell me about cultural genocide in short, in using your words. And I took it hugely seriously. I grabbed a notebook or a tablet or something, started writing stuff down, etc. And he would look up at me. He looked up at me at one point and said, "It was the best thing that ever happened to me." He said, "I became a musician because of it, and that became my life." Mm. And his niece would just be, outraged. But we went through the exhibit together, and he would point out stuff that he remembered, and people that he knew, and the young lady who his grandniece, we would talk, and she was like, "Well, why don't you do this?" And I would take the note, and I would say, I can see that. And after that, when they were leaving, etc., she was much more calm. And I said, I don't know that I can do anything about the interpretation, about the story as it is. And I said, but I could add a couple of labels here, there, and here that can suggest a different storyline. Sure. And I said, but I think I said, and I was as truthful as I could be, I was like, the people in Carlisle think the school was a great thing. I get where you're coming from. And as a young kid, I just felt trapped. It was like, okay, now I'm aware of it. Whereas before it was just sort of something in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Just felt a little off. So that was, to me, that was and even it became a great conversation with many of my classes, many of my students, when we were talking about history of museums and in the wrongs of Indigenous genocide and exoticism and all kinds of things for students. And when we began to talk about Carlisle Indian School, I had to say, look, I was part of that. I mean, I was part of the white supremacist history about treatment of Native Americans. So it's amazing how something like that can just change your life and really sort of propel you sort of in really different mental kinds of directions. So to me, that was it wasn't my favorite exhibit, but it was certainly one that I carried with me as I moved to other places. And when I started telling stories about Jewish rug makers, or which was in New Jersey, or once I got out to Seattle and was working out here, sort of about the labor unions out here and the Chinese exclusion. They all tied together. And as you move through, it took a while for both me and the field to sort of catch up to where it is today.
You've mentioned a couple times that, you were just talking about the impact that the Carlisle Indian School exhibit had. The article that I was reading, you'd already decided to go to grad school before the exhibit opened. Was that decision kind of during the research process that you were like, I really need to go learn more about the field, or was that even long before you had made that decision, long before you decided to do an exhibit?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's 40 some years ago. I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but yeah, it's a great question. And but in general, and in talks with especially Milton, and also with trying to think it, what was his name? The head of the PHMC at the time was Welsh. What was his first name? I forget. Geez, that's just a reach too far right at the moment. But I'd gotten to know him through Milton and had done a couple of sort of just informational interviews when I started thinking about, and yes, I began to realize that if I was going to put together really solid exhibits that told a history that would have meaning and impact in the community, I needed to know more. I just didn't know enough. I read a lot of basic texts. I remember museum registration methods being sort of a Bible of sorts, that kind of thing. But I just didn't have that academic background. And so I was thinking about, and so I, again, in consultation with Milton, and I had also a good friend who was a antiques dealer in and around the area, and he and I would talk about it because he also, and there was a professor at the Penn State campus nearby in Middletown, maybe something like that. But where I took a course on architecture history, and in talking with those people, it was like, oh yeah, I need to up my game. I need to know more about this, or I didn't want to. I loved Carlisle, but I knew there was a lot more out there that I could do. So
Sure.
Yeah, it was about that time. And then with the Indian school exhibit, I really felt a little out of my depth, and had a hard time telling the story. Trying to stay neutral in a story like that is, impossible.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty impossible.
Yeah. And even though I knew that, I didn't have a workaround. And the folks in Carlisle weren't ready yet to be progressive.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you saw it, but on PBS they had a documentary called Home from School that was sort of about the repatriation of I'm blanking on the nation. The Arapaho students from Carlisle back to Wyoming.
Oh, okay.
And, so it was on PBS, and it premiered, and they had down at the Carlisle Theater, which is sort of right across the street from where the Historical Society is, sort of a community gathering to watch the film and discuss it. And one of the things that someone mentioned was there was sort of this generational divide between, I think, the individuals of Milton and PK's time, and after that, I think right around the 70s and 80s, people just started forgetting about the school. Like it just wasn't, they didn't grow up with watching the students march from the school to church, and so I think those stories got lost. And it's only recently that we sort of rediscovered this history in a way, and that the stories are now being told. And you're right, in a much different manner. We're not just blatantly celebrating the school for all the supposed good it did. We're looking at it with a much more nuanced and critical lens.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have an exhibit on the Indian school here in the permanent exhibition, and it's oftentimes people whose families had just are descended from students, they'll go and they'll look at it, and they just have such mixed emotions. There was once someone from I think the Pueblo Nation came last summer, and just seeing Pratt, they just got so angry. But then they would see a letter that he had written praising their grandfather, and they're like, I don't know why, but I just felt such pride that my grandfather was being praised. And it's weird, the emotions that the school still invokes 100+ years after it shut down.
Yeah, it's going to be an ongoing story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pivotal point in the Native American story, in terms of their cultural survival.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably why it evokes all kinds of, I mean, I think people who know think about Jim Thorpe.
Yep.
And
I mean, I grew up in New England, and that's the only connotation I had
Yeah.
with the school.
yeah, and I have to say that he wasn't the only Olympian. There was also an Indian, Louis Tawanama, who I think was he might have been, he wasn't a Navajo, but he was
Who's
from
Hopi?
Hopi, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
you know Louis.
Yep.
I just loved his story, and thought that you know you could make a story out of that as much as you could Jim Thorpe. I mean, they
Yeah.
were both sort of awesome, but yeah, it'll be a long time before anybody comes to terms with what went on, and I'll tell you within that collection, I think one of the, I mean, obviously the photographic collection is amazing in
Yeah.
terms of the before and afters. That alone is a metaphor for everything right or wrong about the school. But there's a collection of pictographs that you guys have.
Yep. Yeah, I just actually digitized those the other day.
Those are that is one of the most amazing collections
Yep.
of Native American pictographs. It's not as big as the Smithsonian's, but that's, I bet you it's 2 or 3 after the Smithsonian's. You guys get interns as well, or
Yep.
does someone do research all the time on staff?
Not so much on staff, but yeah, we do have interns.
Wow, I just think that is a great collection for someone to work on. I always wanted to have the time to do something more, but I was leaving when I really discovered it, and I figured everybody's told me when I went off to grad school, or asked me whether or not I was going to come back and be the new director. That's what they had in mind. And I told them that I had no idea. I mean, I was new adventure. But one of the things that I did while I was at Cooperstown was I sort of really tried to focus on administration, and because the money in the field is in directorships, it's not, and now maybe in technology and development, but those are the 3 areas. But at that time, administration was, and I just figured I could do a whole lot better than what I had been in terms of management than what I had been experiencing at CCHS. And so one of my projects that I had to do when I was at Cooperstown was, or one of the options was to do a strategic plan. And so I did one, and I did it for you guys.
Yeah.
And so I did it. I had to come down. I had to pitch it to the board, and as far as I was concerned, done, over, assignment. The board seemed to like it. I felt like, okay, if I don't go back, at least I've sort of helped them. Well, little did I know that my strategic plan was conceived and developed in the worst possible way from the mind of a 26-year-old amateur, basically. So I came back to visit 10 years after I had been at Carlisle. I came to visit friends and Milton and some of the other people that I knew from around there. And I stopped in, and Linda Whitmer was then director of the museum. And I didn't know her at the time, but I signed in, as everybody did at the time, and somebody mentioned up the staff line that I was in the building, as if I was like Elvis, right? And Linda came down, and she was like, "Oh, let me take you on the tour, and then let's sit down, let's have coffee. Do you have time, et cetera, et cetera?" I was like, "Absolutely, this is, terrific." And so we sat down, and the first thing we did when we got to her office was she reached up on a bookshelf, like right behind you, and pulled out this dog-eared, half torn up, stapled together little plan. And she said, "We're almost finished with it." And I was like, that was a 3-year plan, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "What the hell do you mean?" Which said a couple of things to me. One was that I had way too much influence on an organization, given my expertise at the time. Two, that if some organization really wants to dedicate itself to trying to improve, and they do a strategic plan, they will improve. It told me that planning was really, really important. But third, it was like, I was just blown away. I was like, really? Some of that stuff actually, was reasonable and worked. And I think it was because all of the board was still pretty heavily holdover from when I had been there. And so I pitied poor Linda. I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, they should have wiped the slate clean and just start." So one of my rules in learning that is that once you leave someplace, you never step foot in it again for 3 years.
I was gonna say, well, that's a lesson that Linda took, because I think she stopped in, I think almost exactly 3 years after she left. And that was the first time I met her.
Oh, really?
Because I think I started about 8 months after she had left, and I never saw her. I heard her name a whole bunch. I never saw her until one day it was probably about 3 years after I started. She stopped in, and someone said, "Oh, that's Linda Whitmer." I was like, "That's Linda Whitmer."
Yeah, it's like, "Come here, you're like special." Yeah. So anyway, enough of that.
Well, so you mentioned that, probably for a number of reasons, the Indian school exhibit wasn't your favorite. I'm wondering which one was.
The Cumberland exhibit.
Okay. And was that just because of the topic, or who you got to work with?
I think, one, there had been no work done on it by anybody. Two, I got a little publication out of it. So I didn't realize how important that would be later on.
Mm-hmm.
But three, I felt I really did research. I really took time, and I went all over the county talking with people, and I was really hoping to find a jacquard loom. And in Mechanicsburg, where one of the weavers lived, the house still stood,
Hmm.
and the loom sat in a and I forget exactly where it's at, but it had to be reinforced to the structure of the building, so that it didn't rattle and fall apart and all that kind of stuff. But as far as I could tell, the loom had survived for a very long time. So they were probably working in the 1830s, would be my guess. I forget exactly, but the loom didn't disappear until the 20th century, I was told.
Hmm.
And I was like, damn, if, because few, if any of those survived the 19th century. And it was just an early computer, right? I mean, it was just cards and punches. And I really wanted one for the exhibit, but no one, I looked at all kinds of other kinds of textile museums, Smithsonian, Williamsburg, wherever, and no one had one. No one even knew where one existed. And it's really the piece on there's a card, mechanical device that sits on top that was the critical piece. And I just loved the whole process. Plus, the coverlets themselves were stories both of craftsperson and client, and it often had both of those kinds of information. And so I don't know, maybe the textile medium spoke to me. Certainly the colors did, the designs. Many of the designs go back to, very early Turkish, Persian, Indian design motifs that carry through. All of that kind of thing I thought was really interesting. And we found a whole lot of coverlets to display. And then, of course, I had to go talk with the colonel, because we had to find some way to display them that was that we could do for a time, but not too long, because you don't want them out in the light too long. But we had to hang them in a way that was in a conservation or preservation mindset, that we weren't doing harm to them. And we had, how many coverlets do you have in the collection now? I forget.
I don't know. I know there is a specially designed display mechanism now in the museum to showcase them. But I not working in the museum myself, I don't know how many.
Yeah. Well, it's a small collection, I'm sure, but there were still our collection, stuff borrowed from every place, lots of people. I just thought, and the other thing that really intrigued me is that the connection to all of them was religious. And I never got to explore that further. So I don't know. It was just, it seemed to me to be a really fun, really interesting, intriguing, challenging exhibit. So that was my favorite.
Well, I was just thinking back to that article on the Indian School exhibit that I mentioned earlier, and in it you discussed that you were heading off to Cooperstown, and Roger Steck said, just on that impression that you made, that because of Wilson's impact, we're definitely going to try and hire. We've realized the importance of having a curator here. And so I'm wondering, is the job that you started with the job that you ended up with? Does that make sense?
It does. And I'll answer it in two ways. The first is yes. When I was first hired, I was really hired to catalog the collection, register it, store it, get it in some kind of order so that they knew what they had.
I've been there. I've done that too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Not for CCHS, but for other organizations.
And then probably the second half was then utilizing the collections to develop exhibits and research and et cetera. And maybe the part that I secretly loved the most was finding and building the collection, which I thought we had some pretty significant additions while I was there. Anyway, the other way I would phrase it is that my understanding of what the job was changed very much from when I first started to when I left for Cooperstown. And it's all part of the thinking of, I need to sort of have a whole new skill set and knowledge base if I'm going to make this a career. And that sort of developed from the beginning to the end. So in a way, that was how the job changed for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. The reason I asked is just, because you had mentioned that when you started, you weren't doing these exhibits, and I was wondering if it was kind of your influence that sort of pushed for these larger stories to be, or I guess these temporary stories to be told, rather than just having a permanent gallery. But I didn't know. And then also you mentioned PK's influence in terms of, and Milton in terms of the collecting. I didn't know if you had any influence on that as well, or if that was something that over time you gained their trust in terms of,
I think yes, over time I did gain their trust, and yes, I had considerable influence about things that came in to the collection. And basically it was a decision by three people. And but I guess, I never thought about it this way, but I guess I was in the community a lot, talking with people and running down sort of rumors of so-and-so has this, so-and-so has that, and give them a call and saying, hey, I am the curator over at the Historical Society. They say you have this. I was wondering if I could come and just see it.
Sure.
Can I come and, and had I had a good camera, or today a phone, I could have taken pictures, but at that point, I didn't. And didn't think about it all that much, but and I forget what the first part of your question was.
Well, it was just when you started, I don't believe the Historical Society was putting on temporary exhibits, and then when you came, that was something that you started doing, and I didn't know if that was a part of the expectation for the job, or if that was something that you said, no, I think this is something we need to be doing.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I think once I knew nothing about the collections when I got there. I mean, I knew nothing about any collection once I got there. I mean, I had picked up some from internships at the State Museum and down at York. so I sort of had a glimpse into what collections meant. But I really didn't know much about them. And so when I cataloged them, I spent a lot of time also researching what this stuff was, to the best of my ability and resources that I had, references.
Yeah, and just in the 1970s, that must have been much different than today, going on some sort of internet search engine and typing in, coverlets.
I'll tell you what our search engine was. Our search engine was one, talking with people, but two, estate sales. During the season, which is usually from late spring through early fall, every weekend there were a dozen estate sales in central Pennsylvania, and lots of them also just in Cumberland County itself. And so my friends and I, there were a number. Terry Drockbar was one of my really good friends, and he was an antiques dealer. Jamie Price, Tommy Thompson, who was the nephew, I think, of David Thompson, who was the sort of antiquarian guy. You guys have a collection of his, I think, in your archives. But during the season, we would go and preview all of these estates, and then whichever one seemed the best, we'd go and stay and bid. I didn't have any money, so I actually was never bidding for myself, but I would often bid for somebody, one of these dealers, and they'd be at a different sale so that they could cover more than one sale. And then one of the things that happened at the sales was, which was illegal, was that these antique dealers, small-time antique dealers, would get together, and one of them would buy or would bid on something and get it for cheaper than if everybody was bidding on it. And then after the sale was over, they get together and have a re-auction. And they would split money up, and somebody would end up with the piece and all that kind of stuff. So I was sort of in that group, and you learn a huge amount about all kinds of stuff, because that's where the market was.
Sure.
And I never really purchased anything at those estate sales for me. But as I began to really understand how they worked, et cetera, I would go to estate sales in Cumberland County, and I would see things, and then I would go back to Milton and to PK and say, in Boiling Springs, there's an auction tomorrow. They have, there are 4 pieces of Cumberland County redware. There's a clock, and there's a coverlet. And I think all of them are perfect for us. And those two guys would get together and they go, okay, go after this, and you've got X amount of money to do it. And then I would go and see if I could get it. And I loved doing that. It was exciting. I knew all the auctioneers by that point. And so, you have your own way of signaling. Some guys would touch their ear, some guys would, do that, some guys, it was, and so you could sit there and watch and see who you were bidding against. And I'd go around to everybody, all my guys who I also ran for, and said to them, "It's for the Historical Society. Let me get it." And they go, "Okay, we won't go on. We won't jump on it." And so then I only had to worry about the amateur collector
Mhm.
who really wanted it. Same happened to me in my next, in another iteration after grad school when I was in New Jersey. I had the same kind of experience, but that's how sort of I gained the trust of Milton and PK and everybody else. If Milton and PK said yes, everybody else was along for the ride.
Yeah.
And for Milton, I think he had a much better grasp on what's important for the organization in terms of long-term collection. So we got to play around with that. I really loved that part of the job.
Sort of related, and I mean, you were here for 4 years. You were in Harrisburg a little bit before that, and then I think after grad school, you said you went to New Jersey.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, in the short time that you were in sort of central PA, did you notice any changes, or when you came back to visit, were things changing that you picked up on, or was it pretty consistent?
In terms of just the general,
I guess just
I'm
like
not quite
downtown
sure.
Carlisle, the sort of the surrounding areas, the makeup of the community, businesses, things like that.
Yeah, so Carlisle had already lost most of its big businesses by the time I was at the museum. Frog and Switch and textile mill and all that kind of stuff. They were pretty much done and gone.
Well, I'll note Frog and Switch is still around.
Yeah, I know it is. That there are other ones around that
Yeah.
that sort of didn't think. But Frog and Switch was, yeah. I always loved the name, Frog and Switch. It seemed to me, well, one, even when I was there was a big influx of Vietnamese into the community because it was the end of the war, and they were all at Indiantown Gap on the I guess it would be the federal reservation there at Indiantown Gap. And so they, were let out and into the communities, and I think that was difficult for local communities. I lived next to a family who would cook dinner every day outside on the drive on their, well, sort of a gravel area next to their house. And they had a little round bowl over the fire, and they would all eat, and they would crouch down, and they would sort of do all their cooking, et cetera, et cetera. And it was noisy. I loved it. I used to go, because I was on the second floor, they were on the first floor. I'd go up on the, out on my little deck, and I'd look down at them and wave. And a couple of times they invited us over, my roommate and I, over for, chicken or whatever they were cooking up. But everybody else in the neighborhood, I wasn't all that particularly keen, I think, on that kind of stuff. So there was some change that I noticed in population in Carlisle specific. So the two places I really went were Harrisburg and Carlisle. Harrisburg, I had two aunts who lived in Harrisburg, who I was very close to, and so. But even in, so I never really noticed much of a change in Harrisburg. I think except for more traffic. And that was certainly true over once you get on the other side of the Susquehanna and head towards Carlisle. Was just, there was a whole lot more traffic. I think the other thing that, and I don't know how long after, but maybe like when I came to visit the museum and Linda was director, there are a whole lot less antique shops, which I don't know what that speaks to, except that I think the market and thus what people valued was beginning to change. And I think that change has gone right up until today, where certainly in this area, millennials do not buy old stuff. They just don't. That's not what they value. And I think that that change over 30, 40 years is probably true, as would be my guess, in Cumberland County as it is sort of anywhere else. Which makes it harder for you guys. It made it sort of harder for me in teaching. And there's just a change in what people really want to do. And it took the museum field a long time to make those kind of changes as well. And it's only been in the last less than a decade that they've really, the field has really adopted the idea of social justice as a primary core mission and impacting community. I know that we as a program, museology program here, have as our main goal is to produce museum professionals who will change society. I mean, that's what we think museums do, right? And museums also encompasses historical societies and all kinds of other things. Yeah. But Black Lives Matter, DEAI, BIPOC is all a part of that process. But it's not an easy process. Looks like I didn't see your mission statement on your website. I just didn't spend enough time, but mission statements have been changing pretty rapidly, and it looks like, I mean, I love your website, by the way. It's really
we just relaunched it, so I don't know which one you've seen.
Good. I was able to maneuver very easily, and
glad.
Of course, I want more objects online so I can take a look at them. But
you got to talk to the museum department. I've had trouble getting them to. They're too busy putting on exhibits.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's I don't. That's a little long of a commute for me, but that's good. But yeah, I mean, one of the ways I can do research, because I'm in the midst of, not surprising, I collect.
Sure.
Right. So my wife and I we have a pretty nice folk art collection. Our furniture collection is now pretty much arts and crafts. stuff, and pottery and silver. Silver mostly from the late 18th to early 19th centuries. So we've got these things, but to find out about them, it's much easier when people have stuff in museums online, because they give you information that you need
Sure.
if you're doing research.
Well, I mean, that's something that we've talked about for a long time, and just figuring out how to actually get the catalog online has always been a struggle.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I know. It's you're not alone. We have, and I still have, very close relationships with most every museum in the Seattle area. So it's the same thing everywhere. People wondering how to get that, and is that the information that people want to get anyway?
Sure.
So it's not. I guess it's nice not to be alone.
No, yeah. It's at least we share problems, and hopefully eventually we'll share solutions as well.
Yeah, one can hope. Excuse me, one sec.
No, that's fine.
Just wondering whether or not I could make things a little brighter here.
Yeah, no, that's great. The only other thing I really wanted to ask is, I know you aren't the only beneficiary of CETA, and I'm wondering if you remember working with anyone else in terms of, or what your relationship was with the library department or other aspects of the Historical Society.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Missy Long and John Freilich were the two other people who came on board, I think, with CETA as well. Interestingly, Missy, and now Missy St. Cyr, is the cousin of my roommate when I was in Carlisle, and still remains my best friend. So weird relationships.
Yeah.
But both Missy and John and I probably had a much closer relationship with Missy than, because she was the head of the library and the archives. We sort of shared the photographic collection at the time, but frankly, I thought it belonged rightly to more of an archival. If you had an archives, et cetera, it should be centered more that way. But we never got to the point where it was an issue. If I needed something that related to that, Missy would help me find whatever I needed. John was great to get family connections. I don't know if we ever asked Mary Lou to do the same thing. I don't think so. The three of us had our sort of own little workspaces. Both John and Missy were downstairs in the old Hamilton Library, and my office was the mechanical room on the second floor, which was fine with me. It was quiet and secluded, and I could just focus. Nobody ever bothered me unless it was really, really necessary. It would be like, where the hell did he go? I don't know. He's not around. So a lot of, but I think our relationships are pretty good. I don't remember now exactly how and when both of them. You said 79 they left. I don't know. All I know is that we had a a new librarian, and I forget her name. I can see her, but I can't remember her name. I think she was a retired librarian from someplace. And Anna Bryant, who I think was taking over sort of the correspondence, archive work, questions to the society, those kinds of things. And I suspect that because of Milton and PK and the fondness of everybody for the collections and exhibits, they would have kept me on anyway. They were expecting me to come back and be director, so I felt good knowing that I had a place that I could always go to.
Yeah.
But I just didn't think it would be good for me or the organization. And especially once you get more information and you get understanding of how things should work. And you know what that situation really is at that place, you go, okay, you're in danger of sort of losing friends. And it was such a great experience for me. I really didn't want that to happen.
Well, I was going to say, we've been talking for an hour and a half, and thank you for that. But the number of stories and the recollections after 40 years is amazing. So clearly it had some impact, and I hope hopefully I can speak about the job in 40 years to the detail you have 40 years from now.
I never think I have a very good memory until someone starts asking me questions. You can imagine what it was like in my classrooms as I was teaching. So I think my students were very gracious at times. War stories are always the best. So
yeah, no, those were some of my favorite. So I didn't go to. I visited Cooperstown on a trip. I went to the University at Albany, so for their public history program. So one of the first experiences I had in that program was driving out to Oneonta or to Cooperstown to learn more about just see the program and getting a behind the scenes tour of the Hall of Fame and the Farmers Museum and what used to be NYCHA, but it's since shut down, and just sort of seeing what you guys got to learn about. So
that was also a great experience. Grad school is a lot like camp over 2 years. You form relationships and you learn certain things, and it's sort of an unbreakable kind of bond that you have. And you get this bond with people who you've never met who also went to your grad school. So I think those experiences are really important once you're in the field. I'm thinking the professional ones that you make, or the academic ones that you make, and you probably have had that same experience. So certainly I'm trying to keep up with my alums. It is difficult, but some of them are just lifelong friends. I don't think we have, of course, we have a whole lot more of our graduates from the West Coast to the Mississippi than we do from the Mississippi to the Atlantic.
I'm sure, yeah.
But I'm trying to think if we have a number of people working in Washington, D.C. And New York, but not as many people in Pennsylvania. But I have family still in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh and Philly. So once the pandemic is done, my wife and I plan to sort of be back doing some touring around, and Carlisle was on our list. We don't know very many people, but
Sure.
yeah. Just tell me this, is the St. Charles still open across the street from you guys?
So it's known as the Hamilton Restaurant now.
Oh, really?
I believe that's what used to be the St. Charles. I'll have to double check.
Yeah, it's sort of, it was right across the street from the front door.
Oh, no. I'm thinking of the one on the corner of Pitt and High Street.
I know, yeah, that's the Hamilton, that's still there.
So the one across the street is now known as Cafe Bruges. It's this Belgian restaurant.
Huh. Interesting. It used to be, I
know of the St. Charles. I've heard of the St. Charles.
Yeah, I used to live on the 3rd floor.
Okay.
And so I could roll out of bed 10 minutes before work, and I could just walk over to the museum, and I was there. It was probably the most convenient place I ever lived.
I'll note that in 2024 is 150 years since the founding in 1874 of the Hamilton Library Association. So we're planning on doing some stuff around that. So hopefully the pandemic will be somewhat over by then.
Well, if nothing changes my situation, I will be there, because that's special.
All right. And I know John Fralish is writing a book on the history of the Historical Society. So I'm sure you'll be mentioned in there pretty prominently.
Maybe. That's good. Tell John I said hello.
I will.
I think about he and Missy and Anna, actually, and Roger, I'm sure, is long passed away, but yeah, I think of them fondly.
Well, I always end these interviews by asking if there's anything I should have asked or that you want to mention before we end. Just, you know.
Yeah, I'm looking. I had made a couple of notes before coming on to talk with you. So just that I suppose that my experiences here at CCHS. Wow, I can readopt my places where I've worked. I've been very fortunate in my career.
Yeah.
You know, from there to grad school to becoming a director of another wonderful county historical society in New Jersey, to New Jersey State Museum, New Jersey Historical Society, actually, and then you know, out to Seattle to run the Museum of History that's out here. And all of that sort of sprung from Cumberland County. And as you can tell, it's not difficult for me to relive the fun. I was also young and spent a lot of time. I have no idea whether the gingerbread man
Yes, it is
still there.
Yep.
I spent a lot of time in the gingerbread man and other watering holes. But Carlisle was a great place to work. I don't know that there's really any other stories. I'm going through personally all of photographs and family papers and all kinds of stuff to share with my family. And I don't know that I have a lot of photographic information related to Cumberland County. But if I do, would you be interested in viewing copies? I'll send them along.
Certainly. I know, actually, it's funny because I don't know if this was the case when you were here, but our photo archives is the Todd Photo Archive. That auditorium is Todd Hall. So, you know, we definitely have, again, the names that you're mentioning, you know,
Roger,
as I said, they just stay on the walls. But yeah, no, our photograph collection is still, I think, one of the highlights of the society, and you know, we're always adding to it. And you know, fortunately, digital space is easier to expand than physical space. So if you have digital copies, you know, I'm sure our photo curator would love to see them. And
I will do that. Unfortunately, I never collected objects from Cumberland County, ones that had, you know, real provenance there.
Yeah.
But if I can find anything else that relates to it, I would certainly share, and you can make decisions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, this has been a true pleasure. I can't tell you how much I like going down memory road.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure for me as well. So thank you so much for speaking with me today. As I said, it's been a blast. So
yeah, this is fun.